One of the greatest curiosities of history are female rulers. Empresses, queens, and tsarinas ruled many countries, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. They faced many extra struggles compared to their male counterparts, and some even succeeded against all odds. After all was said and done, how did they statistically compare against their male counterparts? Were women better leaders? Or were they scheming, disrupting snakes, as the medieval chroniclers like to claim? Let's dive into it. But before we get to it, please subscribe and leave a like. Enjoy! Okay, let's start with the ground rules. I started by compiling every independent female ruler and monarch and ranking them from 1 to 5. 1 for terrible, 2 for bad, 3 for mediocre, and 4 for good, and 5 for great rulers. Now I know this is highly subjective, and for individual rulers, the rankings will not match. But over 120 data points, it is almost certain that the overall statistical result will normalize, and I predict that anyone that knows some history will more or less get the same result as me. After finishing with the female rulers, I compiled a random list of 100 medieval and modern male rulers and repeated the same process. So we have some data to compare. You can check the description for more details about the boring statistics and statistical discussion. But here are the results I got. Female rulers had an average score of 2.83, which is practically mediocre. What's interesting is this is actually significantly higher than the score male rulers got, which was 2.75. However, the average score is missing the full picture. The more insightful information is hidden in these graphs. These two graphs show the frequency of each score as a percentage. We can observe that female rulers were mostly mediocre. Some were slightly bad, some were decent, but very few of them were terrible or great. Meanwhile, the men's graph show a much more balanced distribution. A lot of men were terrible and great rulers. If you think about it, there were no female Genghis Khans, Alexander the Greats, or Caesars. But on the other hand, there were also no female Caligulas or Adolf Hitlers. Instead, most of them were simply competent. But why was that? To answer this question, we need to look into how people got to be rulers in medieval, ancient, and modern worlds. There were 4 main ways. 1. Inheritance. You are a crown prince, your father dies, you become a king. This was the most common way to be a ruler. It required no talent, and it was purely based on luck. Here's the thing. Women could not inherit a throne. Either they were straight up legally not allowed to be the rulers, or they would be forced into a marriage and lose most of their power to their husbands. This meant that the average woman would never be able to become a ruler. She had to be exceptionally smart and ambitious. So we don't see terrible female rulers, because the stupid and incapable women would never become rulers to begin with. Well, that explains the lack of terrible female rulers, but what about the great ones? Let's continue examining the paths to rulership. Another path was through government service. Smart people could start from humble bureaucratic service, eventually prove their worth as a good governor or a minister, and they could become rulers. This was fairly common in the more bureaucratic Byzantine and Islamic worlds. The second way was through military conquest or a military coup. A great general or a warlord could prove his military abilities in the battlefield and claim the throne. Now, these two paths went through 2 key skills that made a great ruler: administrative and military. A great ruler had to be a great administrator to know what to accomplish, and a great general so he would have the power to execute his plans. Yet women were excluded from both the administration and the military. A woman would never have administrative or military training, which seems to have been a massive handicap for female rulers. Though there were exceptions, especially in more tribal societies. So, how did a woman become a ruler then? She couldn't rise to it through merit, and she couldn't conquer it. This brings us to the next and the final path to the top: palace intrigue. As wives and mothers, the palace was the only place that women were in proximity to power. And the women that played the court politics successfully became rulers in their own right. Now, don't get me wrong, controlling the palace and the court was a critical skill to being a successful ruler. However, out of the skills that a good ruler needs to have, the ability to control the palace is the most short-sighted one. It is more like a basic requirement. And this is where the shortcoming of the female rulers was. The selection process only favored those that were good at court intrigue. We don't know, maybe there were women with the military intelligence of Alexander the Great, but she would never become a ruler. Meanwhile, a woman that simply knew how to manipulate court officials could, and this seems to have greatly limited women in terms of their legacy. That being said, the same selection process made sure that only the most intelligent and ambitious women rose to the top. So more often than not, they were smart enough to at least prevent everything from falling apart. So what's the overall result then? Were women better rulers? Well, they certainly offered more stability on average, which would be good if you were, let's say, Victorian era upper middle class Englishman, who was content with the way things were. But if you were a starving Mongol nomad, you were much more likely to get a Genghis Khan among the men. Thank you for watching. If you liked it, please subscribe and leave a like. I will see you in the next one.